The Amazfit Helio strap's been getting a lot of attention lately, but it might actually be the Amazfit Balance 2 that's the correct choice for many of you out there. In this video, we'll do a data-driven analysis of the Amazfit Balance 2. We'll take a look at the heart rate tracking performance, the sleep stage tracking, and the GPS tracking to see if you should get this watch to track your health, your sports, and your sleep. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob, and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. And as I said, we'll be doing objective data-driven testing in this review, so let's get to it. I don't want to bore you with any details on the specs of this watch. You can find that on the website of Amazfit. What we're going to do now is start by looking at the heart rate tracking performance of this Amazfit watch, and I actually have high hopes for this device given how well the Amazfit Helio strap did and how many people are actually buying this device. But if you actually want a screen on your Amazfit Helio strap, then this might be the best alternative. Though subjectively I have one main issue with this device, but we'll get to that later. Let's first take a look at the data. And as always, we'll start with one of the easiest exercises for a device to track indoor cycling. And this shows you an overview of how the Amazfit Balance 2 compares to the reference device, which is the Polar H10 ECG chest strap along the horizontal axis. Basically, each point is a heart rate measurement, and the closer the points are to the blue line, the better the agreement. And overall, honestly, the agreement is pretty good, probably good enough. We'll take a look at some individual spinning sessions as well, so we can get a better feel for how good these results actually are. But as a first impression, this looks quite good. The correlation is also quite decent at 0.95. We've definitely seen higher correlations in the past, so this R-value correlation cannot be higher than 1, and 0.95 is pretty good. But let's take a look at some of the individual spinning sessions. And here we have one spinning session where we have more or less perfect agreement with the reference device. So the reference device, the Polar H10, is plotted in blue-green, and the Amazfit Balance 2 in red. And I would say that the overlap of the two lines is basically perfect, with maybe 1 or 2 BPM difference, so no issues here. Also, this second session is almost perfect. Only for this third session do we see a shift in the timestamps. I think here maybe the Amazfit Balance hadn't synced for a while or something, which is why the timestamps were off. I'll actually remove this session and recalculate everything, and then we'll take a look at those results. However, that will take a while, so before looking at those results, let's move on to cycling outside, which is usually a much harder exercise for a device to track, because there's a lot more bumpiness and also a lot of tension on the wrist. So let's see how the Amazfit Balance 2 did for outdoor cycling. Hopefully it did about as well, and if so, that's already a first indication I can recommend this device to many of you. But I'll start those new calculations and then we'll take a look at the results for cycling outside. And now here we have the same kind of plot, but now for cycling outside, where we do see a significant drop in correlation. So 0.9 now instead of 0.95. And I generally take 0.9 as the cutoff for a device being good enough to track your heart rate. So it's really on the border right now. We see some points below the blue line especially. So I think that sometimes there's a delay in picking up on an increase in heart rate. That would be my suspicion. But let's take a look at those bike rides to see if that's indeed the case. And here we have the first bike ride, and this one actually looks very good. So the red line of the Amazfit Balance 2 overlaps basically perfectly with the reference device. So this bike ride is perfect more or less. This second bike ride is starting to show some issues, so some minor delays in picking up on increases in heart rate as we expected. Here for some reason the heart rate was lost for a while, and there were also some moments where it basically wasn't able to detect my heart rate correctly, and again mostly a too low heart rate. Here also some delays in picking up on increases in heart rate, and one peak was completely missed. And here also some small peaks are missed and some delays in picking up on an increase in heart rate. So you're not getting perfect heart rate tracking, but pretty good heart rate tracking. But let's compare these results to the competition. And that's displayed in this overview right here. So this is for cycling outside, where the further to the top right, the better is the agreement of a device with the reference device. And we're using that correlation or R value right here along the horizontal axis. And the Amazfit Balance 2 is marked in red right here. And it's sort of in the second or third tier of devices, but really above the average for sure. And I would say it's good enough. You're going to lose some details in heart rate tracking, but overall pretty good. But I'm gonna zoom in a little bit so we can read those labels better. And this is that zoomed in view. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And we can actually see that the performance of the Amazfit Balance 2 is basically the same as the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the wrist, which makes sense as they have the exact same sensor, though of course the Amazfit Helio strap is a lot lighter, so should provide a better, more constant fit to the wrist. And it's actually doing about as well as the Amazfit Balance 2, which is a lot heavier. So I'm impressed that the Amazfit Balance 2 is doing quite as well. Now again, as we saw in my previous testing, if you wear the Amazfit Helio strap on your biceps, you're getting a lot better results. But for a wrist-worn device, this is pretty good. And we can see, for instance, also that the Amazfit Bip 6 is quite close to this result. So all these devices with the same sensor are doing quite well for cycling outside. Yes, there are better devices like the Apple Watch, the Pixel Watch 3, some Huawei devices. But compared to the average and some of the competition like Garmin, it's actually doing quite well. But next I want to take a look at the results for cycling indoors that were recalculated. So we're going to look at that right now. And as you can see, the Amazfit Balance 2 with the recalculated values is really one of the best devices out there for indoor cycling. So the correlation is now a lot higher, probably 0.99 now, so really good. And it's among some of the better devices out there. But let's zoom in a bit so we can read those labels. So this is now the result for indoor cycling with again the Amazfit Balance 2 marked in red. And as you can see, again, it's doing about the same as the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the wrist. So doing really well among some of the better devices out there. Only the Pixel Watch 3 and the Apple Watch are doing better, but it's definitely good enough. So the Amazfit Balance 2 now for both indoor cycling and outdoor cycling, I would judge as really great for indoor cycling and good enough for cycling outdoors. So far I'm quite happy with this result. But let's now make things a lot more difficult. At least I've seen that in the past for some devices by looking at running outside. That has both the chance of getting cadence lock, so a bad thing, where it locks onto your running frequency instead of your heart rate. And there's also just more bumpiness. So let's take a look at those results. And right here we have the results for running outside, which are pretty good, though I can see there are some issues. So there are some points away from the blue line. And the correlation is now quite a bit lower than for cycling indoors, but higher than for cycling outdoors. So the deviations are smaller, but there are some deviations now away from the blue line. So I'm really curious what this correlation of 0.95 actually means. So let's take a look at some of those runs. Here we have the first run that I did with the Amazfit Balance 2 marked in red and the reference device in blue-green. And here we see an okay, though definitely imperfect agreement. So for this first segment right here, I detected a too low heart rate. So I'm not sure if this is cadence lock or something else, but this is definitely far from perfect. This second, more continuously paced run is pretty decent. This would be good enough. And this third run again shows some minor issues. So some spikes in heart rate that were not really there. So I'm not really happy with these results. I'm not sure why this result is a lot worse than what we saw for cycling outside, for instance. Or I would call this worse because it seems good, but it's actually far enough away that it would influence my decisions. Like a heart rate of maybe 135 is quite different from maybe a heart rate of 120. It would influence me and deciding on my pace. So for running, I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe it's that instability of the wrist and the extra weight. It's still definitely not terrible. I've seen worse results, but I was hoping for better. But let's at least compare that correlation to the competition. And if we compare it to the competition, so we have the Amazfit Balance 2 marked in red right here, we can see it's pretty good, though not as good as, for instance, the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the biceps, or even the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the wrist. So it could be that that added weight gave it a bigger chance of having cadence lock or at least incorrect signals. And if we zoom in a bit, we can actually see it's very similar to my previous testing of the first Amazfit Balance. It's potentially still a bit better, but I was hoping for somewhat better results. And I also don't understand why the Amazfit T-Rex 3 did do better in my testing. So maybe this is just by chance, I'm not sure. But these are the results, so this is what we have to deal with. But to close off with, let's take a look at one of the hardest exercises for a device to track: weightlifting. But before doing that, if you want to support this channel, there's various ways of doing it. And one way where you're supporting me and also supporting yourself is by using one of my affiliate links. And one of my favorite affiliates at the moment is Runna. So I'm getting more and more into running, but I have no idea how to make a running plan, how much to run, how fast to run, and that's why I use Runner. It makes personalized running plans just for you, for your goals, whether it be a 5K, 10K, just getting faster, or maybe you want to run a half marathon or marathon. So I'm training first for a 10K now and then a half marathon. I had some small injuries, so I'm taking it slow, and Runna is helping me do that. So if you want live coaching during your run, so you want to know what pace to run at, and you want the best personalized running plans, you can get a 2-week free trial, which is the best deal out there, by using my affiliate link up here or down here. Or if you're gonna buy anything at all on Amazon, even something as small as toilet paper, if you first click on my link, I get a small commission and it doesn't cost you any extra. Or if you want to directly financially support the channel, you can do that by becoming a YouTube member, which gives you early access to some of my videos. I will prioritize responding to your comments. It's basically Patreon on YouTube and a direct way of supporting me, because these devices are not always cheap. Some of them are sent to me, but last month, for instance, I spent a few thousand euros on just Galaxy watches and Garmin devices. Both of these companies generally don't send me anything or much at all, or sometimes Garmin sends me some things way after the release date. So if I want to review them quickly, I have to buy them myself. So if you want to support me, that would be greatly appreciated, because I'm paying for many devices with my own money. But okay, let's get back to the testing and let's take a look at the results for weightlifting. And for weightlifting, the results are far from perfect, though definitely better than many other devices out there. Especially here in the higher heart rate range, are there quite a few points below the blue line. So quite often the Amazfit Balance 2 detected a too low heart rate, and the correlation is okay, but not great. But let's take a look at those weightlifting sessions. And in this first weightlifting session, we clearly see the issue. So each time I do a set of exercises, we have a spike in my heart rate. And basically none of these spikes were fully detected by the Amazfit Balance 2. This second session is basically the same result. Third session, same result. And this fourth session, also basically the same result. I actually forgot to turn off the reference device here, so that's why there's this gap. Overall, just not good enough for tracking my heart rate for weightlifting. Now, previously I said I used a cutoff of 0.9 in correlation for devices to be good enough for heart rate tracking. But for weightlifting, it should be higher than 0.95 and preferably even a bit higher. And that means that in my testing, only the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the biceps. So let's zoom in a bit. So we have the Amazfit Helio strap on the biceps right here. And the Apple Watches are good enough for tracking my heart rate during weightlifting. And also the Powerbeats Pro 2, but these are very different devices. So these are headphones with an actual heart rate tracker. So that's another option. But in general, if you want accurate heart rate tracking during weightlifting, I suggest wearing an ECG chest strap. And you compare that to many devices. So you could buy a relatively cheap smartwatch, like a cheap Garmin device, for instance, and a chest strap, and you're gonna get amazing heart rate tracking. But okay, these are the results for heart rate tracking. What about those other tests I said I would do? So the sleep stage tracking and the GPS tracking. Well, those I want to look at now. And normally we now move on to the sleep stage tracking, but I actually want to start with the GPS tracking, since it somehow matches quite well with the more sports-oriented things. The way I actually test the heart rate tracking performance is by cycling the exact same route several times and then seeing if the signals overlap really well, which likely means that the GPS tracking is pretty accurate, or if there's actually a big deviation between the lines, which more likely indicates that the GPS tracking was not very good. So let's see how the Amazfit Balance 2 did. So far, I'm actually quite enjoying using this device, so I'm quite excited. I didn't look at the results yet, so let's take a look together. And the route I take is actually cycling to work and cycling back from work. And here we have the results for 4 times I cycled to work, where the green markers indicate the moment that the Balance 2 connected the GPS signal. And I always start my ride on the corner right here. So these signals are pretty close, and the fact that they're so close means that the GPS signal is almost immediately connected, which is good. However, the exact positioning wasn't very good, so it took some time to get a more accurate signal. But let's now see how consistent these lines actually are. So for this first part right here, we definitely see quite some deviation, but that might get more accurate as the GPS signal gets better with time. So right here, it already looks a lot better. This was pretty good. Here I had to stop at the post office, but overall there's still quite some deviation. Here looking quite okay. Also, this is not too bad. Here we have a little bit of deviation, but nothing major. These are actually 2 different routes I had to take because there's some construction work right here now at the moment. Here they're getting pretty consistent again. These are actually also 2 different routes, also because of some construction work. Then here the results are getting pretty decent, though interestingly 2 of these signals are deviating from the other 2, and here there was no construction work. These are actually 2 differently tracked signals where there's sort of a systematic deviation. Maybe over time the calibration of the GPS was a bit off or something. Basically along this entire section right here we see 2 signals deviating from the other 2, which makes me think it's some calibration issue. Then here they're somewhat close together, but I would still say there's a deviation between these 2 signals and these 2 signals. I've not really seen this in this way before. Here it's getting better. Here there is some deviation. Here it's just one of the signals deviating a bit more. And here they're quite consistent. Here there's a lot of deviation. This is not something I'm particularly happy with. And here again, we have 2 signals deviating from the other 2. And basically again, the entire route, either those 2 are deviating or there's just quite a bit more deviation in the signal. It's okay, I would say, though I've definitely seen better results. I was hoping for something a bit better. This isn't terrible, but if this is very important to you, I don't know if I would recommend the Amazfit Balance 2. Garmin devices, for instance, are much more consistent. But let's take a look at 3 times I cycled back from work. And these are the results for cycling back from work with again 3 markers acquired almost instantly. So I have 2 working locations, one right here and one right here. But let's now take a look at the consistency between the signals, which looks okay, though one of the signals here is deviating quite a bit again. Also right here, one of them deviating more. This looks quite good. This I would be quite happy with. Here again, one of the signals going through buildings, which is not amazing. Especially here, we have quite a bit of deviation. I mean, this is showing me that this is not very accurate. It's definitely not bad. There are many worse devices out there, but it's also not great. It's sort of good enough for many, I would say. It's pretty good out here, though again, one signal deviating a bit more. Also right here, we see quite some deviation between the signals. So I'm not quite as happy with this as I would have hoped. I would have hoped for a bit better performance. You'll probably still get pretty decent speed and pace estimates depending if you're into cycling or running. It's just not quite as good as some other devices. Okay, so those are all the results so far, more focused on sports. So both the heart rate tracking and the location or GPS tracking. But what about recovery? This is also quite important. And one of the metrics used in a lot of these recovery type things is your amount of deep sleep, for instance, and your sleep stages in general. So let's see how accurately the sleep stages were tracked by the Amazfit Balance 2. And as always, we're going to use the Z-Max EEG headband, which can actually track my brain waves and which was specifically designed for sleep stage tracking as a reference. And I'm quite excited to see these results, though I have my expectations and regular viewers will know what those are. But let's take a look. And in this sleep stage tracking overview, we have the sleep stages according to the reference device on top and those of the Amazfit Balance 2 on the left, where each column is normalized to 100%. That basically means we're checking what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the reference device was predicted as a sleep stage by the Amazfit Balance 2. And we're going to ignore this awake column because the reference device just detects too many awake moments that weren't really awake moments. So we're going to focus on deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep. And this basically looks exactly like I expected. So most of what was deep sleep according to the reference device was also detected as deep sleep by the Amazfit Balance 2 at about 72%. And the remainder was basically detected as light sleep. Light sleep agreement is also pretty good at about 80%, slightly lower at 78%, and most confusion was with deep sleep. And this likely indicates that a little bit too much deep sleep was detected. However, given that also some of the deep sleep was detected as light sleep instead, maybe that sort of cancels each other out, though still we want to see 100% here, or at least 85% or so. However, where we see the major issues is here with REM sleep. So what was REM sleep according to the reference device was only detected as being REM sleep about 30% of the time according to the Amazfit Balance 2. So that's really not a lot. More than double that was instead predicted as being light sleep instead. And this is what we've seen for many Amazfit devices and many smartwatches in general, is that REM sleep is the hardest sleep stage to track, and it's just not doing well in this regard. However, we can actually put these results into the perspective of many other devices I've tested in the past, and that way you can make a decision what device is good for you in terms of sleep stage tracking. because in some cases good might be good enough and some of you might need a great sleep stage tracker. So let's take a look. And this overview right here basically has all devices in there I've ever tested, where the average agreement over those 3 individual sleep stages is along the vertical axis, and the agreement of the worst sleep stages along the vertical axis. And all devices for which I use the ZMax EEG headband, so the one we used in this video as a reference, are plotted in green. And we can find the Amazfit Balance 2 right here, where in an ideal world the devices would be as far to the top right as possible. We can see that the Amazfit Balance is somewhere in the middle of all devices. It's not terrible like some devices down here, but definitely not good as some devices up here. That's purely because that REM sleep tracking is not very good. We can actually see these results are almost identical to the results I got, for instance, for the Amazfit Bip 6, also the Amazfit Bip U Pro, and it's also somewhere in the same region as my testing of the Amazfit T-Rex 3, the original Amazfit Balance, and also not that far from the Amazfit Helio Ring, though this potentially even did a bit worse, but all devices of Amazfit are somewhat in this area right here. So not the absolute worst, but the second worst devices out there, together with, for instance, some Garmin devices and also Polar devices. So all of these are not particularly good at sleep stage tracking. Now, regular viewers will know the 4 best brands out there at the moment are Apple Watches, the Nuku Hour Sleep 2 app, the Oura Ring, and also the H-Sleep Pod. Now this last one, the H-Sleep Pod, is my favorite sleep improvement device. It's really expensive, but it's a thing that goes around your mattress. It can track all these metrics like your heart rate and your sleep stages without wearing anything on your body for the 2 people independently. But why I love it is because it can actively heat and cool each side of the bed independently. And I'm such a hot sleeper that cooling it down is just amazing for me, especially in summer. And you can set each side of the bed at an independent temperature. And this is the only reason I get any sleep on those hot summer days. So if you want to make this device just slightly more affordable, you can use my affiliate link up here or down here to get the best deal possible on the H-Sleep Pod. And you'll be supporting this channel at the same time and helping me making these videos. And for instance, also helping me in paying my editor, Alex. But okay, those are the sleep tracking results. But what are now my overall conclusions for using the Amazfit Balance 2? And would I actually recommend you use the Balance 2 or the Helio strap? Well, let's talk about it. But I actually need to get a little bit more comfortable, so let's go to my living room and talk about it. So who's the Amazfit Balance 2 for? Well, I think that many people that are interested in heart rate tracking and want to watch could actually be happy from having the Amazfit Balance 2 as their main smartwatch. It's not that expensive at, let's say, around $300. It has pretty good heart rate tracking, pretty good battery life, and okay GPS tracking. Where the device struggles is in terms of sleep stage tracking. So if that is your focus, then I wouldn't get it. But otherwise, I've been pretty happy with it. The one subjective thing I don't like, and I was actually talking about this with another reviewer as well, is that in bright sunlight, the Amazfit Balance 2 struggles. There's somehow a sort of film over the screen or something that makes it reflect light in a weird way and actually makes the screen quite a bit less visible. I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe it's some kind of anti-scratch coating, but I really don't like it in bright sunlight. In light like this, when it's not super bright out, it's fine. But in bright sunlight, it just somehow looks washed out and as if it's reflecting more sunlight on the top layer than it should. I can't really explain it. It's difficult to capture on camera, but that's one reason I wouldn't get this device. It sort of actually feels less premium than it actually is. I don't know if any of you have this device and if you had the same experience. If so, let me know in the comments below. Overall though, I have to say that's a pretty minor complaint. I do like this device, and given the price, battery life and all those things I've listed, I can actually recommend it for many of you out there. However, do I prefer it over the Amazfit Helio strap? Well, that really depends on what your goal is with this kind of device. I personally don't mind too much having a phone with me and having to start my exercises from that. If you don't like having your phone with you, then something like the Amazfit Helio strap, which is basically a Whoop strap, which I've hidden under here, is just not very feasible, because often it's not going to detect all your activities, you're not going to get your pace, your GPS, any of those things. For it to work reliably, you're always going to have to start your workouts from your phone, and if that's something you cannot deal with, then something like the Amazfit Helio strap, even though it's just $100, isn't a good choice. Then I'd rather spend a bit more money, even if it's 3 times as much, on something like the Amazfit Amazfit Balance 2. I do like this a little bit over, for instance, the Amazfit Bip 6, which is a cheaper Amazfit device with the same sensor. The Amazfit Balance 2 right here does look and feel a lot more premium. But if you have very little money to spend and you do want the device with a display, then maybe the Amazfit Bip 6 would be a better choice than the Amazfit Helio strap, which is even more expensive than that, though I know many people actually prefer having a strap like this without a display. So it really depends what you are personally looking for. All these three Amazfit devices, the Helio strap, the Balance 2, but also the Bip 6, I can recommend them to some of you, but it depends on your budget, what you want to do with the device, and how long you're planning to use it. I could imagine, for instance, the Bip 6 feels quite outdated a little bit more quickly than these other two devices, but it's all down to personal preference. The one thing all of them have in common is that if sleep stage tracking or general sleep tracking is your focus, they're likely not doing well, or at least you're not gonna get a good estimation of your total REM sleep, your total deep sleep, and which sleep stages you were in general. If that is your focus and you don't have so much money to spend, then probably different Fitbit devices are your best choice, since these are in the second tier of sleep stage tracking devices and they're also quite cheap. And if instead you want this kind of screenless option, then I would recommend the Whoop strap. I always wear it on my biceps right here, it's hidden under this pullover right now. But the Whoop strap is sort of my favorite device overall, and it's the one I personally use for my health and sports tracking. So it's pretty decent at heart rate tracking, it's pretty decent at sleep stage tracking, and it has a great app. I think that's the one way where the Whoop strap really stands out over much of the competition, except for maybe the Oura Ring, is that it has a great app with nice data interpretation, good feedback and all those things. And that's also one thing where Amazfit still has to improve a little bit, so getting a better app. But you can already see that they're trying to copy Whoop, so I could imagine they're getting closer and closer with time. Now, if you do decide to get the Amazfit Balance 2 or the Amazfit Helio strap, a Whoop strap, another device like an 8 sleep pod, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to support the channel and get the best discount possible in most cases, you can use my affiliate links up here or down here. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Amazfit Balance 2, check out this video on the Amazfit Helio strap, or this video on the best sleep stage trackers.